Greetings from Prishtina, Kosovo. I'm here in the courtyard of my hotel, and I thought I would take a moment to reflect on the many experiences that I've had so far here. It's only been 3 days, the first 2 of which I spent traveling with some people that I met in Tirana, Albania, actually. They were part of a startup competition that I was judging, because Albania and Kosovo, being a place where people are ethnically Albanian and speak Albanian, participate in kind of a common market for things like startup competitions and pop music. And they said, you absolutely must come to Kosovo, and we even arranged for me to give a talk on Tuesday, tomorrow. But until then, I'm here as a tourist. And I was nervous about coming because when you think of Kosovo, you think of a war. If you're Serbian, you might think of a war that was fought to gain independence from Serbia, and that there might be some tensions or hostility towards Serbian people here. And there are, but I can't know how much, because mostly I've been American when I'm here. I speak in English, my first name doesn't immediately give me away, and I don't sort of offer the fact that I'm sort of ethnically Serbian when I first meet people in a way that is a fun fact in most other places in the Balkans, but here it's just something I've avoided doing, just for, I don't know. I've had people like randomly at the gym say like, well, I don't like Serbians, talking about, you know, places I've been or other things like that, not knowing that I am. So it's definitely like a thing. It's weird too, because like things are in Serbian and in Albanian, on like road signs and official kinds of things, but generally things are like entirely in Albanian, right? Just only a few places. And driving around, like the sign entering a city that says what city it is, yesterday on our road trip, a lot of the Serbian names of the towns that we were passing through were like spray painted out. You know, like vandals, just like not liking Serbia. Or Serbian. And so, to put that into perspective though, in Skopje in Macedonia, it was the opposite. I saw signs, because Skopje has a large Albanian population, I saw signs that had Macedonian and Albanian, where the Albanian was crossed out in spray paint. Like, it always comes back to, it's the Balkans. And the feeling that I have here is, perhaps unsurprisingly, something in between what I know of Serbia and Belgrade and what I know of Albania and Tirana, the capital of Albania. For example, people here are taller than in Albania. They're tall like Serbs. They're also a lot kind of rougher around the edges. Remember that thing about staring when I walk down the street? The Albanians here do that to me a lot, in a way that Serbs do in like Belgrade or other parts of Serbia, and in a way that Albanians in Albania just don't. I don't get that kind of post-communist exuberance that I talked about when I was in Tirana here. And in terms of just sort of like the feeling of the place, like it feels more like Serbia to me than Albania did, which makes sense because it was part of Serbia for like the better part of a century. And there's been a lot of cross-cultural influence, and like it's weird though to think that this non-Slavic people, Albanians, were part of Yugoslavia since the beginning, and not one of the Yugoslav republics that all of Yugoslavia was made up of, but as sort of like a separate part of Serbia. And I don't know all of the like geopolitics of like why they exactly wanted to separate and what autonomy exactly meant to them and how much of it was because of like policy disagreements or nationalistic chest thumping. I have no idea actually, and I need to look into that. But I felt much more at ease being in Tirana or all of Albania than I do here. I think partly because I'm like secretly Serbian here, and I'm sort of aware of that and just sensitive to it. But also I think just the fact that people here are different than in Albania. It's a different country with a very different recent history. You see soldiers around. You see, just like walking around the city, you see a lot of construction. You see a lot of like foreign aid offices. There's like a neighborhood that I walked through the street, and it was like every building or like every office down the street was like some development agency from one country or another. Yesterday we went to a 14th century monastery called Dečani, which is gorgeous and amazing, and it's just this giant church, and they had to build a wall around it, and there are NATO soldiers protecting it from vandalism. And the weirdest thing is that there were these barricades on the road that prevent you from going in a straight line. You have to kind of go around them to prevent cars from approaching the monastery too quickly, or I suppose leaving too quickly. And like it's weird, and being inside the monastery like felt like being inside the Serbian embassy. Like we were in this little walled space that is part of Kosovo, the country that Serbia doesn't recognize, by the way, and everyone in there spoke Serbian, and like the monk spoke Serbian, and the history grad who volunteers there from Belgrade was Serbian, and like the tour bus full of Serbs like flowed people into it, and it just felt like it was just me and my like 2 Albanian buddies who were there to see it, and they were thrilled. They had never been. They really liked it. But I was just very, very aware of like, okay, these people here, these Serbs, feel like very under, I don't want to say under siege, but just like very, very aware of the fact that they are a tiny minority in tiny pockets, protecting this, medieval history. I have to admit that I wasn't aware of just how deep my prejudices were coming here. Specifically, prejudices about Albanians in Serbia, and I would say about like Muslims in Serbia too. And it's uncomfortable for me to say that, but I felt in a way like not that I'm like resentful about, how do I put this? I was uncomfortable going into a mosque, for example. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what I'm supposed to do there or what I'm allowed to do, and I didn't want to offend people, and I was worried about how I would be perceived being there. In the same way that I might like not want to go into like a Black Baptist church in a part of Oakland that is quickly gentrifying, so as to not be the like curious, hipster who's like, hey, what's this about? I want to join your church. And like, you know what, maybe it's okay if there are just black spaces. And I thought maybe a mosque was like that too. So that's one thing. And the amazing thing that happened was that yesterday we went into a mosque. My friends wanted to pray, and so like we went in there, and I sat there and I like prayed with them, and it was fine. Of course it was fine. Nothing happened. It's just a room where you pray, and there's a clock that tells you the different times of day when you're supposed to pray that day. And it's amazing how little it took for me to not be afraid of it anymore, so that today I went to the Grand Mosque in Prishtina, in the city that I am, in and like knew what to do. Took off my shoes and went inside and like kneeled in the corner and then just like sat quietly for a while. And I knew that if anyone showed up, it would be totally fine. But I've never done that before. And I wouldn't have been able to if I hadn't had friends who I could be so open with and who I could ask them about their faith and what they do and why they do it. And they were very happy and open with me to tell me all about it and about the structure that it gives to their lives and how it helps them in business and how it's just a really like a nice thing to be able to do a few times a day to like pray and like de-stress. And suddenly it sort of made complete sense, and it wasn't this abstract thing other people do, but it was a thing that like, oh, this is a way of life. And of course it is, and I know all of these things intellectually, but to see it is a very, very different thing. And I think similarly, when I think about like Albanians in Serbia and the Kosovo struggle, I only heard about things from the Serbian perspective, the very like open-minded, very worldly, but still Serbian perspective of my parents and the people that I grew up around with. And what we talked about in the late 90s was about how unjust the NATO bombing of Serbia was to let Kosovo become independent, and how they used depleted uranium warheads and how that's toxic, and how it was a violation of international law. And I even posted on Instagram about the bridges that were destroyed by that bombing in Novi Sad. And I'm here now, and I hear a different side of things. I hear about how the Serbian armies were trying to get Albanians to leave, and that 1 million people were displaced forcibly, at gunpoint, basically. Like, my 2 friends that I was driving with, their houses were shot at by Serbian military officers, and then they were told to pack up that moment and to leave. And a lot of people did, obviously. They went to, for example, Albania. And then after the war, they came back. And just like, that's a whole other side of the story of trauma and of sort of ethnic resentment and fear. And it makes total sense that you wouldn't like Serbians if you grew up hearing those stories, in the same way that like I grew up resenting Albanians for essentially being an ungrateful minority in Serbia and wanting independence, and then essentially getting the help of the lawless NATO to do it. And I don't know what the actual answer to that question is, of what actually happened and who was right and who was wrong. But both sides have like terrible stories, and of course most people, I would say the vast majority of the people affected, had nothing to do with the decisions at all, right? These are just regular people whose governments are doing stuff, and they have to pay the consequences. Which brings me now to what I think about Serbia. Like, everything that I experience here in the end sort of comes back to like, what is my view on the Balkans? Because Serbia is kind of like the major actor in a lot of the recent Balkan activity, right? Serbia is one who established Yugoslavia in the first place. Serbia was the seat of power of Yugoslavia. Serbs were the ones who tried to keep the Yugoslav republics from splitting off, and like fought them when they tried to, in most of the cases. And it seems that like for the last 30 years, every single time that Serbia has tried to militarily prevent someone from breaking off from it, whether it's Slovenia or Croatia or Bosnia and now Kosovo, like every single time that they've tried to hang on, they've made the situation worse for themselves, to say nothing of the people that they were fighting. That Serbia has this desire to hang on to its territory and to its like broader identity, and And if, in the case of Kosovo, if they had simply, not easily, but if they had simply negotiated the terms of independence, I think Serbia as a country would be much more unified on the question of where to go politically. A big question in Serbia right now is whether to join the EU, whether they want that, or whether they want to be allied with Russia. And it goes without saying that being allied with Russia is a terrible idea, but a lot of people resent NATO and the United States and the West for bombing them in the 90s over Kosovo. And that is preventing them from moving forward and from looking toward the West, because these are people who essentially betrayed them. That's how they see it. And Russia, meanwhile, denounces NATO, right, and in what they do, and so you could have a sympathetic view about Russia when, like, just recently, like 20 years ago, your country got bombed for 3 months for something, in order to take away, like, the heart of your country, as some people see it, so the religious, spiritual heart of your country, which is what Kosovo represents to a lot of Serbs. And of course, it's easy for me to say this. Well, they should have just let it go. But that Serbia is stuck in this way. Of all of the countries of the former Yugoslavia, except maybe Slovenia, Serbia was in the best position to just like kick ass all by itself, independently. But by trying to hang on to all of the republics and to stay larger and to stay more powerful, they've stagnated in a way that is so depressing. And maybe I'm looking at this overly simplistically, and maybe you can't just let go of a part of your country that wants independence. But maybe you can. And I don't have a prescription for this problem, just that, like, diplomacy and, like, being the bigger person don't seem to be traits that are, like, strongly expressed in Serbian politics or in the Serbian people. And I think that they would agree with that. But it's something that seems very clear to me now, looking at it from all of these different vantage points, having now been to all but one of the former Yugoslav republics on this trip. And so I have one more full day tomorrow here, when I'm going to give a talk at the Startup Center, the Innovation Center here, and that's going to be interesting. But I'm so glad that I came and was exposed to, quote, the other side, but also that I just exposed myself to, like, the very real lives of people who have lived here for essentially forever, and who wanted their own country, and through a bunch of international aid and construction and noise and mess, they're getting it, and they're making it work somehow. It is a mess right now still, of construction and noise and overcrowdedness, but they know the direction they want to go. And in a way, I wish the same for the country that I'm closest to. Thanks for watching.